If you're looking for any plugins, presets, extensions to save you time and create awesome videos, my digital asset store is at the top of the description. Today, I'm going to show you 10 editing/effect ideas for Adobe Premiere. I've worked on hundreds of videos in Premiere over the past few years, mainly music videos. So some of these will be tips that I think are very important when it comes to your editing, and some will just be some random effects that I think are cool and easy to do in Premiere. Also, before we start, if you're interested, I made a 10 effects idea video for After Effects as well as for Blender. So if you want to check those out, the link will be down in the description. So let's hop in and get started. All right, guys, so starting off with number one, and this is going to be the only thing on the list that isn't a specific effect or editing technique. This is more of a concept. So what I'm talking about here is training your eyes, training your brain to find spots in the footage that make sense for creating cuts, seamless transitions, things like that. So I'm going to use rap music videos for context here, but of course you guys can do this with any type of footage. Maybe you're working on like race car footage, maybe you're working on a dance video, whatever. It's all the same. For me, with rap videos, I like to pay attention to the hands. So say, for example, there's a part where they're flourishing their hands in the footage. I like to take that part to kind of create momentum and string these different clips together to sort of create this flow with the editing. So again, if you guys can identify parts in the footage that work well together, it can allow you to create some great moments with the editing. Another great example of this is the Jerry production Lil Durk music videos. They do a great job at sort of stringing those together to create that momentum and that flow that I'm talking about. So number two is creating simple, clean, seamless transitions, and you can do this with overlays and sound effects. This is probably one of the first things I'd recommend you learn if you're new to video editing, because it's so easy to do. So all you're going to need for this is some sort of overlay clip. So you can find a ton of these on the internet. Even if you don't find an actual overlay clip that you download, you can even just download screenshots of different assets that you can use for these transitions. So again, you take your overlay assets, you drag them into your scene like this, and you want to make sure you only have like 1 or 2 frames of each of these clips. So I'll just move 1 frame, cut them out like that. Now we can go in here and just sort of resize them. So I'll go in my effect controls, I'll go over to motion, and I'll just scale this up. And then you want to play with the blending mode. So go over to opacity, click to open that up and change the blending mode. And you guys can experiment with whatever you think looks best. Color dodge, this is like a film burn transition asset. So that looks pretty good. Once you have the first clip like this, you can just right click and just copy it. And then you can paste all those attributes onto the other clips. So right click, paste, and then we want to paste in the motion and the opacity because that's our blending mode, like that. And there you guys go. And then you find the spot where your clip transitions and just position these small little overlay clips in between that transition spot. So here's where it switches scenes and you get a nice, clean, seamless little transition just like that. Super cool. And again, you can do this with all different types of clips. The key is just getting that 1 frame out. So make sure you're zooming in, Control Alt and mouse wheel to do that. And just click C to grab your little razor tool, cut out those single frames. You can also add to this by adding in a sound effect. I like to use freesound.org. I found a ton of really awesome things from there. So I looked for, in this case, like a camera clicking sound, and you can download the one that you want and then just drag that into your clip. And then pay attention to the audio waves and position that with the transition like that. So pretty cool. Again, a way for you to amplify those transitions using some sound design. Number 3 is combining effects, doing this the proper way using nesting clips. So let's talk about how to do that. So I'm going to grab 2 shots here and we're going to create a transition in between the 2. So here's my first shot and then here's my second shot. So let's place them together. And then let's just create a little transition using some of these VR presets. So if you type in VR, Adobe Premiere has a lot of these VR denoise, VR digital glitch, which is cool, chromatic aberration. They also have these VR transitions. So you can just place it in between the cut. So here's VR light leak. And if you want to change that, you can change the duration here, or you can click, and then in your effect controls, you're going to see all the parameters for that. So say you have one transition down, but you want to sort of stack some other effects onto this. Well, the way to do that is by using nesting. So I'm going to mark the parts where the transition starts and ends. So I'll go here, click this button to add a marker, go here and click this button to add a marker. And then I'm just going to click C and just sort of cut this sequence here. So we have this sort of in-between clip. Select that, right click and nest. And essentially what that does is combine these two clips into one clip. If you ever need to go back to those two clips, you just double click. Here they are. This is the same as pre-composing in After Effects. And you'll also notice here, say for example, I have some sort of effect onto here like turbulent displace effect, and I have a mirror effect. Well, if I change the order of these effects, you can see how the results are changing. So the way that these effects are stacked onto each other is going to affect things a lot. So it's a better idea just to have the effect the way you want it, like this, and then you can lock it in by nesting and then place any other effect that you want on top. So it's a cool technique for combining things. Again, we can nest the transition part, and we already marked out where the transition is. So I can just cut where those two markers are, and I can place my effects or combine. Say instead of this light leak, we want to have like a glowing light leak. I can add in VR glow or any other effect you want. This is just an example. And because we marked out where the transition starts and ends, I can match that start and end point with my keyframes. So in my effect controls, I can go to VR glow. I can take this Luma threshold and just start it at 0 and keyframe it. In the center, I can give it crazy glow. And then at the end, I can put that back down to 0. So you see now we have this glowing transition with our mirror, with our other light leak transition. So use that to experiment and to stack things on top. Number 4 is the Procamp effect. And this is a singular effect that I want to talk about because I don't think a lot of people do talk about this in a lot of tutorials. Usually whenever people search for some crazy sort of color, they go with the hue saturation preset. So search for HLS in Adobe Premiere and you have this color balance, and that lets you change the hue, it lets you change the lightness, and it lets you change the saturation. In my opinion, the Procamp effect is like that, but it just seems a lot better. So if I put on Procamp, you'll see we also have hue, but it's generating a lot less noise, which is nice. And then you have a contrast control and a brightness control. So if you're going for sort of cool cinematic or trippy color, this is probably your best bet for controlling things. It also has this split screen button, which is pretty nice as well. So let's paste that Procamp effect onto here. And what I did was just create a little cross dissolve. So you can right click between any two clips here and just go apply default transitions so that it'll just fade in. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory, especially if you guys are creating any sort of transition. I used that Procamp effect for a ton of transitions in my transition preset packs. If I want to use one of my preset transitions between here, I can just cut in between where the clip transitions. I can select and nest them to put them together into one clip. And then I can drag something in from my Speed Demon pack. So from here, I can add in that Procamp effect. And now instead of just the distortion, I can go through to the beginning and just cycle the hue. So let's go like one rotation. And now we'll have this like changing color distortion, which looks pretty cool. And again, you have the benefit of controlling contrast, brightness, etc. straight from there. All right, so number 5 is creating quick strike effects. And this is very useful, again, for music videos or in high energy edits where you're trying to match something to the audio, you're trying to match the energy, and that's by creating these quick strike effects. Now, the most basic way to do this or to explain this, say you have your audio here, this is just a sound effect, but I'm going to use it as a quick little example. You can take this audio layer and just expand it so that you can see these waveforms a bit better, and say that this is a bass hit part in the song. What you could do is match a little keyframe quick strike animation in the video to match the audio. So say right here, there's this bass strike. We want to match the visual to that sound. So here, what I'm going to do is just take my clip, open up in my effect controls, the scale under motion, keyframe it, and just pop it up. Then I'm going to move to the beginning of where the bass strike would be, put it back down, and let me cut this clip so you can see those keyframes a bit better. And then you move to the end of the bass strike and you put it back down. So you just have a quick little bump up like that. And what you can do is just even increase this depending on how much of a bump you want. And you see if I play that, it just sort of pops towards the screen. And that's one example of it. Again, it's just creating a quick little keyframe flurry. You can also do this with, again, other effects. Like for example, let's take a directional blur. So we'll go to the middle. You want to keyframe the blur length. Go to the start, 0, go to the end, 0. So the exact same thing. You want that to be a bit more dramatic, Put up the blur length. All right, guys, number 6 is controlling the motion of the visual. So this ties back to number 1, where I talked about looking through the footage to find parts that work well. Well, sometimes you're just not going to have parts that work well. Maybe you're working with limited footage. Maybe your subject isn't that animated. So it's great to have these skills to be able to control the motion so that you can create those moments that flow well together. So some of the tools that you have at your command for doing this, you will obviously have the transform effect, which a lot of people will ask why use the transform when you can keyframe scale and positioning. Well, with transform, you can control anchor point. You can control rotation straight from here, which is nice. And you also have the shutter angle, which makes any of these transform effects look much better because you'll get some of that realistic motion blur. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. You guys also have blurring. You can add shakes to kind of create some artificial movement and speed for the visual. And speaking of speed, this is probably one of the easiest things you can do to control the motion of the clip. So we have an example right here. Normal little transition where we're just going from this shot to the next. Well, we can add some more speed to this. You'll see right there, again, paying attention to the clip. Let's go ahead and click C and just make a cut. And then we'll right click, speed duration. And sometimes all you really need is like 150 to 175 just to kind of emphasize the movement a little bit better. There you go. And you can do the same for the other clip. Let's give it 175. So we've created a little transition where the speed just kind of picks up right there. I've done that a lot in my videos. Again, it's the easiest way to do that. You can also do speed ramping, which I'm not going to get into here, but there are a ton of tutorials for doing speed ramping, and you can control the speed with different keyframes. So again, edit to the music. If there's a part that's high energy and you just have your subject standing there, it's not going to fit that well. Something like some quick speed can be all you really need. Now let's talk about using the transform effect, using blur, things like that. So I created this little transition here. This is essentially just 2 clips. Again, there's what it looks like. And I nested them together to create our transition bit. I'm just going to mark out some parts that I'd like to create a shake for. So we'll use some transform, we'll use some blur just to add motion. So again, here's our raw transition. Let's drop in our transform effect and breathe some life into this. So in our effect controls, we'll look at transform, and we're just going to add our first marker, keyframe, position, scale. So with a shake, what you want to do is move 1 frame, and you just want to move the positioning. And the more you change the positioning, the more amplitude the shake will have. So if I do like a little subtle change, it's not going to shake that much. If I'm going like crazy like this, it's going to shake a lot. Next frame, I'm just going to move it to the left. And again, to get rid of this black line, we'll just scale it up to compensate. Then you want to move again to the next frame. And let's do something different. Let's move it this way. Maybe bump it up a little bit. Next frame. Go this way. So here's what we're doing. You see that we're shaking the screen just by adding random changes to the movement. Now, if I wanted to, I could just select all those keyframes I just made and just Control V, paste them over and over. You're going to get something like that. And again, we moved it a lot, so it's a pretty intense shake. And because we're doing this with the transform effect, you can also take that shutter angle and bump that up. So now you're going to get that realistic motion blur, and that makes the transform look a lot better. So just from that simple little trick, you have a much better crazy motion transition. And again, play with the clips. If you're going from somebody just standing still, not moving, to another clip of somebody standing still, not moving, the shake won't make sense. But because we're transitioning into this shot where it's up in your face, there's a hand at the camera, it's close up, you can really get some nice results just using motion and controlling. All right, number 7, we're going to talk about an effect here, or specifically a couple effects that we can use together to get some different looks. We're going to talk about the find edges effect, and we're going to talk about extract. We have a few B-roll shots here of some cars. We have some IRL car footage here, and then we also have some 3D shots of some cars. This can work on any type of footage. It's just an idea for you to work with. What you want to do is hold down Alt and drag the clip up. So we're duplicating it in a video layer above. Let's get rid of any effects that may be on here. And then we're going to go in and add the extract effect. So this controls the black and the white input. We're going to set the black input to 0 and the white input to 0. So this should completely go to nothing. And then at the start here of our clip, we're going to keyframe the white input. We're going to drag to however long we want this to be, this transition. And we're going to put the white input all the way up. So here's what it looks like. And this is a great trick for phasing things in. There's a lot of things you can do with depth maps and After Effects that use extract. I'm not going to go too into it, just figured I'd mention. But at this point, we're going to add in find edges. We'll slap that on there. We want to click invert. And this is great just for isolating these edges to create some glowing lines, which we'll show you in a bit. It gives you this sort of like scan line effect. And then before we do anything from here, I like to clean this up. And I like doing that in the Lumetri color panel. So you guys want to go to Window, Workspaces. I have my custom workspace, but you can go into color. And then I'll just mess around with the exposure. I want to try and clean up all this like grainy noise, but only keep the lines, the bold lines. So we'll sort of put these down. So that looks good. Now we're going to add in the tint effect. And what this is going to do is it allows you to change the color of black or white to anything else. So we have a black screen with white lines. So this is where you choose the color of your line effect. So maybe we want like glowing red or glowing blue lines. And then we can add our glow. So again, for that, we can use VR Glow in Adobe Premiere. And best settings for this, you want to take your threshold, play with that until you see it pop up on your lines. You want to take your glow radius and then take your glow brightness if you're still not seeing that and bump that up. So you can see we have this sort of scan line in effect, which is pretty cool. And then once you're at this point, all you have to do is go all the way up here to the opacity and just change your blending mode to something like Lumetri Add. So it's a pretty cool effect. I see a lot of people do this with like car edits and things like that. Again, from here, we still need some cleanup. We can go up to the extract effect and we can play with the softness. And you're going to get different results depending on the footage you're using. So keep that in mind. Now, another effect that you can stack on here that gives a bit more cleanup is a blur. So for this, I like to use the directional blur. I feel that it gives the best results. So slap that on there, bump up some blur length, and you'll see it just kind of gives it this sort of shimmering. And you can change the direction of that as well. And yeah, I think that is a lot better. You see very harsh with it off, turn it on. And then of course, if there's other parts that you don't like in here, what you could do is just mask this entire clip. So we go into the opacity, grab your pen tool and say, we only want this effect like around this car. We can just draw a little mask. Easy as that. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I like how it animates in, and there's a lot of different things I've talked about with find edges, especially in After Effects, to give you some cool, colorful outline looks. All right, so for number 8, we're going to talk about creating slow motion without shooting for slow motion. Now, this is something I did talk about in the past, but I think it's probably like 1 or 2 years ago where I actually mentioned it. So to normally create nice, smooth, slow motion, you need to shoot at a higher frame rate. So you see if I hover over this clip here, it's 24 frames per second. So if I was to take this clip by right click, speed duration, let's go like 30%. This is just normal speed duration. See how choppy it is? You obviously don't get nice, smooth, slow motion because it's at a cinematic standard 24 frames per second. You would need to shoot at 60 frames per second or higher. Now, a workaround for that, you guys can right click, we'll go to speed duration again like we did before. This time I'm going to put it to something like 60, and you can play with this number depending on the results. It's going to depend on the clip, how much is moving around. And then what you want to do is you want to go down to time interpolation, and you want to change it from frame sampling to optical flow. We'll click OK, and here is our result. So pretty cool. You see if I pause here or if I full screen, the parts that are moving, you're going to notice a little bit of distortion in artifacts, but it still does allow you to get some nice, smoother looking footage as opposed to always playing full speed 24 frames per second. Also, this is important to know whenever you do this. So again, I'll do it one more time. Speed duration, let's go 60, optical flow. At first, if you have this red bar, it's probably going to be choppy, and that's because you need to render this preview to actually see it. So select, right click above the timeline, you go to mark selection, and then you go up to sequence in the top left and you go to render into out. So this will actually render it out, and now you can see what it looks like full rendered view. All right, guys, so number 9 is how and when to use motion tiling for zoom, spins, things like that. So if you're creating a transition, maybe you want to create some motion like we talked about before, you're going to run into an issue here. So say, for example, I drop a transform effect. Here's my transition from this clip to the next, and I want to rotate and have it spin from this shot to this shot. So what you think you would do, you would place transform in your effect controls. You would keyframe scales, keyframe rotation, and you would go here, and then I could type 1x for the rotation, so it will do one full spin like this. Now you'll see we run into the issue where we have our spin, but we have these black edges. Naturally, what you'd think to fix that is scale it up. So you take the scale, just go like this. And while that does sort of fix the issue, again, you may have to go in and try and scale specific parts just to completely avoid that. You can also put up shutter angle to sort of blur it. Yeah, we sort of get it, but it's super zoomed in. So to avoid that for any transform effects you're doing, here's what we do instead. So let's take away the transform and we're going to start from scratch here. What we're going to start with is the replicate effect in Premiere. So you can drop in replicate, and you see here on my footage, it actually has black bars normally. I have it scaled up, so this is what it looks like normally. So what I need to do before I apply replicate is just right click and click nest. Now you'll see when I apply replicate, we have a seamless tile start, and that's what you want to start off with. So let's change the count from 2 to 3, and now we can go in and actually create our transition. So let's look up transform, and we'll place that on here. This in particular was confusing for me. I saw a lot of people using this sort of motion tile in Premiere when creating these type of things. I know there was a motion tile effect in Premiere before. They got rid of it. Now it's called replicate. So yeah, I figured I'd sort of walk you through it. So at this point, let's do the exact same thing. We're going to keyframe scale. We're going to keyframe rotation. And at the start here, before we do any animation, we're going to scale it all up so it starts normal, just like that. Now we can go to where we want our spin to start and end. So we want the spin to end here. I'll type 1x. Again, we have a full spin, so now it looks better. We just have these ugly edges that you can see here, so we just need to blur them out. In transform, you can uncheck use comp, add your own custom shutter angle. And again, if you want to see that better, mark selection, sequence, and render into out. Now, if you want the best results possible, I recommend making a fast spin. So instead of having all these edges here, what I could do is, again, this marker is where the clips change. I could just take this keyframe for the rotation, start the spin there, go a little bit past here, maybe end the spin there. And then because once you do that, the shutter angle gets super crazy, you can just reduce a bit of the shutter angle until you get it looking the way you want. Yeah, there we go. Looks a lot better. You don't have to do any zooming. You could even blur out these lines a bit more just by adding something like a fast blur. And then you can just mess with a bit of this blurriness like that to kind of clean up those edges. And you can ease and auto Bezier and do all that good stuff too to kind of smooth these out. Number 10 is to use Premiere as a stepping stone. There's a ton of cool, unique, and original things you can do by using Adobe Premiere as your setup tool. Premiere is a sequencing editing software. If you're looking for the craziest visual effects or something new and different, you're probably not going to find it here. You're pretty limited as to what you can do other than just editing and putting it together because that's what the software is made for. But what you can do is use it to branch out. I've made a ton of tutorials using this little screenshot button here where I just set my footage in there. I find a spot that I like. I take a screenshot of that frame of video, and then I plop that frame into Photoshop or even some AI program to achieve a certain look. Also, if you do want to go down the crazy VFX route or maybe do compositing and things like that, I highly recommend you guys get After Effects. If you have After Effects and Premiere installed, all you have to do to bring your clip into After Effects is just right click on it and click send to After Effects composition. I've used that workflow in so many of my tutorials, so a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but I know there may be a lot of beginners watching this that don't know. Creating that dynamic link between Premiere and After Effects is great. If there's something like complex masking or some certain effect, usually I'll just send it over to After Effects and I have way better control than I do in Premiere. So again, that's what I like and dislike about Premiere. It is limited, but at the same time, everything starts in Premiere and ends in Premiere. No matter if I'm working in Blender, if I'm working in After Effects, even if I'm creating 3D renders, I still need to take that footage that I create in the 3D software and edit it together or color correct it or make it flow together like I am in a lot of these examples that I'm showing you. So the best thing you could do is not just rely on one software, learn all the little bits and pieces, build your skill set. So if you did enjoy, consider leaving a like. It helps me a ton with the YouTube algorithm. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.